A dying billionaire asked a nurse to pretend to be his daughter, but his wife was shocked to see. The hospital room was an oasis of luxury amid the chaos of the outside world. The air conditioning hummed softly, keeping the room cool despite New York's sweltering August heat. In the center of the room, a king-sized bed occupied the space, its white silk sheets contrasting with a pale, fragile figure that rested on it. Richard Blackwood, once a titan of the pharmaceutical industry, was now fighting for every breath. His eyes, once alive and penetrating, were dull and sunken in a face marked by illness. Beside the bed, a young nurse, Sarah Thompson, adjusted the four with shaking hands.
Here.
Blackwood, Sarah whispered, her voice shaking slightly. Is there anything else I can do to make you comfortable? Richard turned his head slowly, his eyes boring into Sarah's with an intensity that made her shudder. Sarah, he said, his voice hoarse and weak, I need to ask you something. Something that will change your life forever. Sarah's heart quickened. She felt a lump form in her throat, a mixture of fear and curiosity taking over her. What is it, sir? She asked, leaning closer. Richard closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering all his remaining strength. When he opened them again, they were full of tears. I need you to intend to be my daughter. The words hit Sarah like a punch to the stomach. She felt the air leave her lungs, her mind spinning with the implications of this absurd request. But sir, she stammered, I can't. Please, Richard begged, his bony hand gripping Sarah's arm with surprising strength. I never had a daughter. My wife, she can't know the truth. I need to make this right before I leave. Sarah felt the weight of the world fall on her shoulders. The desperation in Richard's eyes was palpable, mixed with a guilt so deep she could almost touch it. His heart broke to see the once powerful man reduced to this state, begging for one last chance at redemption. I don't know if I can do this, Sarah murmured, her voice cracking with emotion. It's wrong, I know I'm asking the impossible, Richard interrupted, his voice gaining strength with urgency. But you are my last hope, Sarah. Please help me die in peace. The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah could hear the frantic beating of her own heart, feeling caught between compassion and fear of the consequences. She looked at Richard, seeing no longer the intimidating billionaire, but a broken man, desperate for one last chance to do something right. At that moment, before she could contain herself, Sarah heard her own voice, trembling but determined. I will. The words hung in the air, charged with promise and danger. The relief on Richard's face was palpable, but Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. She knew, deep within her being, that she had just embarked on a journey that would change her life forever. Little did she know that on the other side of the bedroom door, an elegant female figure had stood, her hand frozen on the doorknob, having heard every word of that fateful conversation. Elizabeth Blackwood, Richard's wife, felt her world crumbling around her, as a storm of emotions, shock, anger, betrayal, began to gather in her heart. Sarah left Richard's room on wobbly legs, her heart hammering against her chest. She barely noticed Elizabeth Blackwood hiding behind an ornate column in the hallway. Her thoughts were in turmoil, the magnitude of what she had just agreed to weighing on her like a ton of bricks. Finding refuge in the staff bathroom, Sarah stared at her reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman staring back at her. His normally bright green eyes were clouded with doubt and fear. What did I do? She whispered to herself, hands shaking as she braced herself against the sink. How could I agree to that? The memories of his past, buried for so long, began to emerge like restless ghosts. Sarah closed her eyes tightly, but the images came anyway. She found herself a child again, huddled in a dark corner, listening to her parents' screams echoing through the house. The smell of alcohol and despair permeated the air. You will never amount to anything. His father's voice reverberated in his mind. No one will ever want you. Sarah opened her eyes suddenly, panting, tears streaming down her face. She swallowed hard, fighting the wave of nausea that threatened to engulf her. No, she muttered to herself, clenching her fists. I'm not that scared little girl anymore. I survived. I became someone. But the insidious voice of doubt whispered in his mind, but at what cost? Lying? Deceiving? A soft knock on the door brought her out of her dark thoughts. Sarah? Are you in there? The voice of Jenny, another nurse, sounded worried from the other side of the door. Sarah took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. Yes, Jenny. Just a moment. She opened the door, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Jenny looked at her with obvious concern. Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Sarah laughed humorlessly. Maybe I saw it, she replied cryptically. Then, summoning up all her courage, she asked, Jenny, have you ever done something? Something you knew was wrong, but for reasons that felt right at the time? Jenny frowned, confused. What are you talking about, Sarah? Sarah hesitated, the weight of the secret already weighing on her shoulders. She desperately wanted to share his burden, but fear stopped her. Instead, she shook her head. Nothing, forget it. I'm just tired, I guess. Jenny didn't look convinced, but before she could press further, the sound of high heels echoed through the hallway. Elizabeth Blackwood rounded the corner, her eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and determination. "Nurse Thompson," she called, her voice sharp like a blade of ice. "We need to talk. Now." Sarah's blood ran cold in her veins. She exchanged a quick, frightened look with Jenny before turning to face Elizabeth. "Yes, Mrs. Blackwood," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. As she followed Elizabeth down the hallway, Sarah felt as if she were walking toward her own execution. Each step took her deeper into a maze of lies and deception from which she feared she would never escape. The tension in the air was palpable, filled with unspoken secrets and painful truths about to be revealed. Sarah didn't know what awaited her, but she was certain of one thing. Her life was about to change irrevocably, and there was no turning back now. Elizabeth Blackwood's office was a study in elegance and power. The dark wood-paneled walls seemed to swallow the light, creating an oppressive atmosphere that made Sarah feel even smaller. Elizabeth sat behind an imposing mahogany desk, her blue eyes boring into Sarah like daggers. "Sit down," Elizabeth ordered, her voice cold as a New York winter. Sarah obeyed, her legs shaking so much she feared they might give out at any moment. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner of the room. Finally, Elizabeth spoke, each word laced with venom. "I heard your conversation with my husband." Sarah's heart stopped for a moment. She felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her dizzy and disoriented. "Mrs. Blackwood, I can explain." "Explain." Elizabeth interrupted, her voice rising dangerously. "Explain how you plan to usurp the place of a daughter who never existed? How do you plan to deceive a dying man and his family?" Tears began to form in Sarah's eyes, but she held them back. "It's not like that," she whispered. "I just wanted—" "What?" Elizabeth hissed. "Money? Fame? What could a little nurse like you want from a man like Richard Blackwood?" The accusation hit Sarah like a slap. She felt a wave of indignation rise within her, momentarily overcoming her fear. "I don't want any of this," she exclaimed, her voice shaking with emotion. I just wanted to give him some peace before he dies. Is it that wrong?" Elizabeth leaned back in her chair, her eyes never leaving Sarah's face. For a moment, something like understanding passed across his features, but it was quickly replaced by iron determination. If you like stories like this, subscribe to the channel. There will always be new videos, and you won't want to miss any of the excitement. "Wrong or not," she said slowly, "you've already agreed. And now, you're going to follow through on this." Sarah blinked, confused. "What? But I thought—" "Think less and listen more," Elizabeth cut in. "Richard may be dying, but he still controls an empire. If the truth about his fixation with an imaginary daughter comes out, the company's stock will plummet. Thousands will lose their jobs. Do you want that on your conscience?" The weight of responsibility fell on Sarah like an avalanche. She felt suffocated, trapped in a web of lies and consequences she could barely understand. "What do you want me to do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elizabeth's lips curved into a cold smile. "You will play the role of the perfect daughter. You will learn everything about the life you should have had. And you will convince everyone, including me, that you really are the Blackwood heiress." Sarah felt the world spin around her. "But, and after Mr. Blackwood. 2D. Elizabeth added, her voice hard. "Well, honey, that's where things get really interesting." At that moment, a knock on the door interrupted the tense conversation. Jenny's head popped up, her face pale with worry. "Sorry to interrupt, but it's Mr. Blackwood. He's asking for his daughter." Sarah and Elizabeth's eyes met, filled with dark understanding. The game had begun, and there was no turning back. With her legs shaking, Sarah stood up. She felt the weight of Elizabeth's gaze on her back as she walked to the door. Each step took her deeper into a world of deceit and secrets, a world she feared she would never be able to escape. As she made her way to Richard's room, Sarah felt as if she were walking to the scaffold. Her mind swirled with unanswered questions. How could she convince everyone that she was someone who never existed? What dark secrets did the Blackwood family hide? And more importantly, what price would she have to pay for her participation in this elaborate farce? The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly before him, each step echoing like a harbinger of doom. Sarah knew that by crossing the threshold of Richard's room, she would be sealing her fate. There was no turning back now. The farce was about to begin, and with it, a journey that would test the limits of his courage, his morals and his very identity. Sarah entered Richard's room, her heart beating so loudly she was afraid everyone could hear it. The air felt heavy, filled with expectations and unspoken secrets. Richard was sitting up in bed, his eyes glowing with a feverish intensity that made Sarah shudder. "My daughter," he whispered, reaching a trembling hand toward her. "You came." Sarah swallowed hard, feeling the bitter taste of the lie on her tongue. "Yes, Dad," she replied, the words sounding strange and wrong on her lips. She approached the bed, each step a battle against the urge to run away. When Richard took her hand, she had to fight the instinct to flinch. "There's so much I need to tell you," Richard said, his voice urgent. "So many secrets I carried for so long." Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. "What kind of secrets?" she asked, her curiosity momentarily overcoming her fear. Richard looked around nervously, as if he feared the walls might have ears. "The Blackwood Empire," he whispered, "wasn't built on hard work and innovation alone. There are shadows in our past. Things we did, that I did." Just then, the door opened and Elizabeth walked in, her face a perfectly composed mask of concern. "Richard, darling, you shouldn't be fussing like that," she said, giving Sarah a warning look. "Elizabeth," Richard said, his voice suddenly cold. "Leave us. I need to speak to my daughter in private." A flash of something, anger? Fear? Passed Elizabeth's eyes, but she nodded stiffly and left the room. As soon as the door closed, Richard squeezed Sarah's hand with surprising strength. "Listen to me well," he said, his voice low and urgent. "In my office, there is a safe hidden behind a Van Gogh painting. The combination is his date of birth." Sarah felt her stomach drop. She did not know the birth date of Richard's imaginary daughter. Before he could respond, Richard continued. "Inside the safe, there are documents. Evidence of things that shouldn't have happened. You need to destroy them before Elizabeth finds them. She can't know. No one can know." "But why?" Sarah asked, her voice shaking. "What do these documents contain?" Richard closed his eyes, a pained expression crossing his face. "The truth about how I truly built the Blackwood Empire. The lives I destroyed in the process. And the truth about your mother." Sarah felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. "My mom," she repeated, momentarily forgetting her role in the charade. Richard nodded gravely. "She didn't die in an accident like everyone thinks. The truth is much darker. Elizabeth, she..." At this moment, the door opened again. Elizabeth entered, followed by a serious-looking doctor. "Richard, Doctor Stevenson is here for your consultation," Elizabeth announced, her tone leaving no room for argument. Sarah found herself being gently but firmly pushed out of the room. She took one last look at Richard, seeing the desperation in his eyes as he formed the words "the safe" with his lips. In the hallway, Sarah leaned against the wall, her mind spinning. What was Richard about to reveal about his imaginary daughter's mother? What dark secrets did the vault contain? And how could she, a simple nurse caught in a web of lies, navigate this maze of secrets and betrayals? As she contemplated her next actions, Sarah failed to notice the shadowy figure watching her from the end of the hallway. A man in a dark suit spoke softly on the phone. "Sir, we have a problem. The girl, she knows about the safe." The whisper of an answer came over the phone, cold and implacable. "Then you know what needs to be done. Eliminate her." The man hung up the phone, his eyes fixed on Sarah. The hunt was about to begin, and Sarah had unknowingly become the target of forces far beyond her understanding. Sarah wandered the halls of Blackwood Manor like a ghost, her heart heavy with the burden of secrets she now carried. Night had fallen, shrouding the property in unsettling shadows. Every dark corner seemed to hide invisible threats, every whisper of the wind carried promises of danger. Finally, she arrived at Richard's office. Her hands shook as she turned the handle, the click of the door echoing like a gunshot in the stillness of the night. Van Gogh's painting stared back at her from across the room, its turbulent brushstrokes seeming to mock her dilemma. Sarah stepped closer, her heart hammering against her ribs. With trembling fingers, she moved the frame, revealing the hidden safe. "The date of birth," she muttered to herself, panic rising in her throat. What date of birth? Just then, a noise in the hallway made her freeze. Footsteps approached. Sarah frantically looked around, looking for a place to hide. The door suddenly opened, and Elizabeth walked in, her eyes widening when she saw Sarah. "What do you think you're doing here?" Elizabeth hissed, her voice cutting like a blade. Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. I was just looking for this." Elizabeth interrupted, holding up a yellowed envelope. "Richard's precious secrets." The shock ran through Sarah's body like an electric current. "Like you?" A cold smile spread across Elizabeth's face. "Oh honey, did you really think I didn't know about the safe? About my husband's dirty secrets?" Sarah took a step back, feeling the table press against her back. What are you going to do? Elizabeth's smile widened, predatory. The question, my dear daughter, is what will you do? Because now, you have a choice to make. Just at that moment, the door opened again. The man in the dark suit that Sarah hadn't noticed before walked in, his hand inside his jacket in a way that left little doubt as to what he was hiding. Ladies, he said, his voice cool and professional. It looks like we have a stalemate here. Panic exploded in Sarah's chest. She looked from Elizabeth to the mysterious man, feeling trapped. Who are you? What's going on? Elizabeth laughed, a humorless sound. He, my dear, is the solution to our little problem. Unless, of course, you are willing to cooperate. Cooperate with what? Sarah asked, her voice shaking. With the charade continuing, of course, Elizabeth replied softly. But not just for a few weeks or months. Forever. The shock of the revelation hit Sarah like a punch in the gut. Forever? But why? Because, daughter, Elizabeth spat the word out like it was poison. The Blackwood Empire needs an heir. And you have just become the perfect candidate. At this moment, a scream echoed throughout the mansion. Jenny's voice, full of panic. Sarah. Sarah, where are you? It's Mr. Blackwood, he's. Time seemed to freeze. Sarah looked at Elizabeth, at the mystery man, at the envelope in Elizabeth's hands. In an instant, she made her decision. With one quick movement, Sarah grabbed a heavy paperweight from the table and threw it at the window. The glass shattered with a deafening crash. No! Elizabeth shouted, stepping forward. But Sarah was already on the move. She threw herself through the broken window, shards of glass cutting into her skin as she fell into the darkness of the night. As she rolled across the lawn, hearing the screams and chaos behind her, Sarah knew her life would never be the same. She had crossed the point of no return, plunging headlong into a world of secrets, lies, and danger from which she might never escape. And as he ran through the night, with his heart racing and fear coursing through his veins, a single question echoed in his mind. What would happen now? Sarah ran through the darkness, her lungs burning and her feet bleeding from cuts in the glass. The sound of voices and hurried footsteps echoed behind her, mixing with the roar of blood in her ears. She didn't know where she was going, only that she needed to get away. Suddenly, a hand grabbed her arm, pulling her behind a large tree. Sarah opened her mouth to scream, but another hand silenced her. Shoo, it's me, Jenny whispered, her eyes wide with fear and worry. What's going on, Sarah? Why are you bleeding? Sarah shook, tears finally escaping. Jenny, it's all a lie. I'm not his daughter. Elizabeth. She wants me to keep pretending. There's a man. I think he wants to kill me. Jenny turned pale, but her voice remained steady. Come with me. I know a safe place. The two crept through the property's gardens, Sarah's heart pounding with every shadow and noise. Finally, they arrived at a small tool house, hidden behind dense bushes. Inside, Jenny turned on a small flashlight. What are we going to do now? She asked, her voice shaking slightly. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to calm her heavy breathing. I don't know, but I can't run away forever. I need to find out the truth about all this. At this moment, Jenny's cell phone vibrated. She picked it up, her face turning even paler. It's a message from the hospital. Sarah. M.E.A. Blackwood passed away a few minutes ago. The shock hit Sarah like an icy wave. No, she whispered. It can't be. He had so much to tell me. Suddenly, a deep voice sounded from outside. We know you're in there, Miss Thompson. Get out now and no one will get hurt. Jenny grabbed Sarah's hand, her eyes filled with fear. What do we do? Sarah took a deep breath, a strange calm washing over her. No more running away, she said, her voice firm. It's time to face the truth. She opened the door slowly, hands raised. The man in the suit was there, along with Elizabeth, and to her surprise, a police detective. Sarah Thompson, the detective said, you are under arrest for fraud and conspiracy. Elizabeth smiled triumphantly, but her smile faltered when Sarah spoke. Before they take me, there's something everyone needs to see. Sarah took a small USB device out of her pocket. While I was at the office, I copied the files from Richard's computer. Everything is here, the frauds, the bribes, the murders. Elizabeth's face went livid. You're bluffing, she hissed. Sarah looked straight into her eyes. Do you want to take a chance? The detective frowned, looking from Sarah to Elizabeth. I think we all need to have a long talk at the station. As she was led to the police car, Sarah felt a mixture of fear and relief. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that for the first time in her life, she was doing the right thing. Jenny ran to her before they got into the car. Sarah, what's going to happen now? Sarah smiled sadly. I don't know, Jenny. But whatever it is, I'm going to face it head on. No more lies, no more pretending to be someone I'm not. As the police car drove away, Sarah looked out the window at the Blackwood mansion, now lit by flashing squad car lights. It was the end of an era, the collapse of an empire built on lies and betrayal. But for Sarah, it was a new beginning. A difficult and uncertain, but honest beginning. And as the city lights passed by in a blur, she felt, for the first time in a long time, a sense of peace. The future was uncertain, full of challenges and possible legal consequences. But Sarah knew that no matter what happened, she would face it with the strength and determination she discovered within herself during that fateful night. Sarah's journey was far from over. In fact, in many ways, it was just beginning. But now, free from the chains of lies and fear, she was ready to face whatever lay ahead, with the truth as her only ally. If you like stories like this, subscribe to the channel. There will always be new videos, and you won't want to miss any of the excitement.